Hi guys, my name's Gary and I'm a motorhead. Have been for a long time. Originally I was going to call this series Reflections on an Old Chrome Bumper, but my brother convinced me that was sappy. I'm making some brief slideshows to share my automotive history and opinions with other experienced motorheads. Guys like me who spent too much of their time working around and under cars for many years. I welcome comments, corrections, and critique, but please keep it clean and polite. This is just for fun, okay? It's not intended to be a serious historic document. There'll be omissions, inaccuracies, and even outright lies here and there. I'm well over 70 now, and I became interested in cars at a young age. That's me at 6 with Cousin Terry and my dad's new 52 Meteor. For you non-Canadians, Meteor was a Mercury version of the Ford sold only in Canada. I still have the original bill of sale for that car. With optional white wall tires, two-tone paint, and oil filter, it rolled off the showroom floor for $26.77. That wouldn't pay the taxes on a new car. Next, I'm changing a tire, white wall of course, on our 54 Buick Special. Then there was a 54 Monarch Lucerne, another Ford Canada-only model. That plane is a Trans-Canada Airlines Viscount, the first turboprop in service in North America. Passenger jets were still a few years in the future. I learned to drive in our 55 DeSoto Firedome. Hey, if DeSoto was good enough for Richie Cunningham, it was good enough for me. Besides, I loved its toothy chrome grin. Whatever happened to chrome? He asked reflectively. I got my learner's permit right after my 16th birthday, and later that same week, I passed the written and driving tests for my full license. Things were so much simpler for young drivers then. Since then, I've driven millions of miles all over the US and Canada, plus one memorable stint driving around England and Scotland. Not only were the steering wheels on the wrong side, everybody else drove on the wrong side of the road. Bloody British hippies just walked out into traffic. Over the years, I've owned about 80 cars, plus trucks and vans, leased another dozen or so. Some I had for years, a couple for only a day or two. The least I've paid for a car is $1. The most is, oh my God, way too much, don't ask. I've put countless miles on hundreds of other vehicles of every description, from Corvairs to Corvettes, Valiants to Vipers, Fords to Ferraris. A few times I've handled a big truck, and just once I got to drive a bus. Of course I can drive stick, 3-speed, 4-speed, 5-speed, column or floor shift, plus non-synchro manuals, semi-automatics, and 2-speed axles. Besides decades of drag racing, my automotive experience includes rallying, some off-roading, including the Rubicon Trail, working as a cab driver, some weird guys worked for that one company, and as a chauffeur. I worked as a mechanic for a couple of different Chrysler dealers, and as assistant service manager at a Datsun dealer. Oh, Datsun, that really dates me. I also helped organize and serve as a judge at classic car shows. I spent over 20 years before retiring with Rossroy BBDO Canada, originally as product specialist and then as senior writer. Rossroy US had been Dodge's marketing agency since 1926, before Dodge was part of Chrysler, and then they were Chrysler's agency until Fiat took over. I wrote everything from executive speeches to car and truck catalogs to training videos. In my first office, I would have had an engine or two in there if they'd let me. Well, most of my mucking about with cars was done as a hobby, with friends and relatives who also enjoyed working on and racing cars. I got to witness all of the dramatic changes in the automotive industry over the past 60-plus years. Cars were becoming much more interesting when I started going to car shows at a young age. Just compare a 53 Dodge to a 57, a 53 Pontiac to a 57 Pontiac, or a 53 Ford to a 57 Ford. We finally had bright colors, powerful engines, futuristic styling, and lots of chrome. Interiors looked less like funeral parlors and more like sun parlors. I went to as many auto shows as I could, and I hauled away as much free literature as I could carry. The attractive models at many of the manufacturers' stands might have had something to do with my interest as well. I was fascinated by concept cars on display, like this Pontiac Bonneville, the Chrysler Falcon, and the Lincoln Futura. That last one looked familiar. It later became the original TV Batmobile. I've heard people comment that cars of the 50s are too flashy, too outrageous, and totally tasteless. All those fins and chrome and garish colors, two-tone and three-tone combinations. But look at what manufacturers are offering us now. Chubby little overpriced SUVs that are almost identical in size and shape. How many of these can you actually identify? Yeah, a bunch of drab clones, expensive drab clones. The most popular colors for cars nowadays? Silver, white, and black. Those aren't even colors. The gaping grills give these things all the charm of a wide-mouthed catfish. Cars used to look interesting and colorful inside. Now they look like they're designed by people who also decorate prisons. Instrument panels use video screens with layers of menus instead of actual controls. Even Rolls-Royce, once the epitome of traditional upscale style, now greets drivers with a garish LCD display instead of proper classic gauges. Besides the cool concept cars, there were some production cars made in the 50s that have since become classics. Check out a 55 Thunderbird, 56 Corvette, or a 56 Imperial. I was into Mopars mostly because of their styling. Chrysler stylist Virgil Exner had recently come out with his new Forward Look theme, and his production cars were way ahead of anything from Ford or GM. His futuristic designs made everything else look dated and gaudy. Check out this 1958 Chrysler Saratoga hardtop. Low and sleek as a jet fighter, just a light touch of chrome, expanses of glass. Then check out a 1958 Buick hardtop. Big difference. It's like comparing a sleek young fashion model to your plump old auntie who's wearing all of her jewelry at once. Many nameplates I knew as a kid unfortunately reached the end of the road in the 50s, although a few lingered on life support into the 60s. Studebaker, that's famed designer Raymond Loewy here, who was also in charge of designing the beautiful Avanti. Studebaker's historic South Bend plant closed in 1963, but Studebaker cars like this one continued to be built in Hamilton, Ontario, till 1966. Then there's Packard, Hudson, Henry J., Kaiser, and DeSoto. It was depressing seeing the new 1961 DeSoto models at the Detroit Auto Show, knowing that the mark was already doomed. And Nash, remember the cute little Metropolitan, Rambler, and of course Willys. One of my uncles had a tiny King Midget, which I suppose qualifies as a car. More recently, I was sorry to see the end of long-lived brands like Plymouth, Pontiac, and Oldsmobile. Olds was 107 years old. Mercury and Saab also vanished from the automotive landscape, not to mention all those unique AMC cars. Garth drove a Pacer, man. But Saturn, Geo, and Hummer, I don't think anyone really misses them. And what about poor Edsel, whose name has become synonymous with failure? For Christmas 1958, I received a plastic promo model of the new Edsel. It looks pretty good from the side and back, but that front end. The best description I ever heard was that it looked like a Pontiac sucking a lemon. But seriously, is it really much worse than the chrome beak on a '73 Pontiac Grand Prix? Well, Edsel showed us that even a company filled with bright people can make bad decisions. It's sort of like a drunken college professor proposing to a stripper at a stag party. Back to me. I started working on cars with friends and various patient adults before I had my license. Most cars could be fixed with a service manual and some basic tools, and repairs were cheap. You could replace the fuel pump on a Chevy for less than $20 in less than 20 minutes. But now, the cost of replacing the fuel pump on a newer Impala is almost $700, just for the parts. When I left high school, I went to work as an apprentice mechanic at a local service station in a particularly bitter cold winter. This was before self-serve, so I stood outside in snowstorms pumping gas and also did way too many sub-zero service calls, but I did learn a lot. When summer finally arrived, I thawed out and decided that I'd fiddle with cars just as a hobby, so I got an office job. I could barely stand the excitement there. I realized I missed working on cars, so I'd finish my day job at 5, go home to change into my grubbies, and go to work at the garage until closing time. I was saving to buy a nice ride, and what I really wanted was a 57 or 58 Chrysler 300 letter car. These cars were powerful, fast, and luxurious. Inside the 300, supple leather seating and all the room and comfort you could want. Powered by a mighty 392 cube Hemi with up to 380 horsepower, they set a record of over 134 miles per hour on the hard-packed sand of Daytona Beach, Florida. You know, they still let people drive on that beach today, but at a maximum of 10 miles per hour. It's hard to imagine you're the dashing Sir Malcolm Campbell doing 200 miles per hour when kids are passing you on bicycles. However, due to minimum wage poverty, my first car was a $75 1950 Dodge sedan. Not what you'd call the most memorable of vehicles. It was powered by, if that's the word in this case, a flathead 6 with just over 100 horsepower. Getaway engine, they called it. I couldn't get away as fast as a city bus. I soon found a car I really wanted, a 1958 Chrysler New Yorker convertible. It was a fabulous fin machine powered by a 392 Hemi, loaded with options. My friends called it the Batmobile because of those soaring fins and deep black finish inside and out. It had one feature I miss to this day, an optional gas heater. It was surprisingly quick for about a 5,000-pound car, quicker than a new 289 Mustang. Best of all, it was an ideal car for leisurely top-down drives on warm summer evenings with a cute girl. Well, my personal finances took a hit and I sold the New Yorker. I needed cheap wheels, and a young lady I knew offered me her immaculate black Chevy Bel Air two-door sedan for $125. With a 6-cylinder Power Glide, it was hardly a performance machine, but at least I had wheels again. I'm going to take a minute to talk about 1957 Chevys here. Besides that Bel Air, I had a 150 two-door sedan with a 4-barrel 283 and a 4-speed manual. Later, I had a 2-door hardtop with a 283 automatic, in which I learned a costly lesson. Old tires plus ice storm plus large tree equals bent Chevy. I know what 57 Chevys are like. I've worked on them, and to be honest, I've never much liked them. For some reason, they've become the embodiment of classic 50s cars, and hugely popular. You can actually build a complete new 57 Chevy from available reproduction parts. But in my opinion, the 57 Plymouth is a far better car in almost every way. Now, before you fire off that nasty note, allow me to explain. Prior to 1955, Chevys were plain and utilitarian. They had a reputation of being cheap and dependable cars with their proven stove-bolt 6-cylinder engines. Then along came the 1955 Chevy, and it was a revelation. Cleanly styled, very nicely proportioned, a gem of a car. The front end was especially well done, with its European-style grille and minimal chrome. To make it even better, under the hood was a brilliant, lightweight yet powerful 265 cubic inch small block V8. It was such an outstanding engine design it would still be around in modified form 60 years later. The icing on the cake was the stylish Nomad wagon, like a show car on the street. Chevy sales rocketed past Ford in 1955. The 1956 Chevy models were also good-looking, with just enough chrome trim and new two-tones to add some sparkle where it was needed. But by 1957, the competition wasn't just catching up, but overtaking Chevy. The 1957 Ford was dramatic looking, low and sleek, with available two-tone paint. But the styling leader among the big three standard sedans was the all-new 1957 Plymouth. Plymouth's ad line that year proclaimed, "Suddenly it's 1960," and the Plymouth models really did look years newer than their competitors. They made the 1957 Chevy look like what it was, a warmed-over rehash of a two-year-old model. This all-new Plymouth was longer, lower, and wider than the Chevy, with flat front fenders, a swept-back windshield, thin roof, and rising rear fins. It was a revelation in the low-price field. This was one of Virgil Exner's best forward-look designs. Besides being larger outside, the Plymouth was roomier overall than the Chevy, had more glass area, and even had a much larger trunk. Well, we hear a lot about how powerful the 57 Chevys were, but look at the facts. The standard Plymouth 277 Cube V8 had 35 more horsepower than the Chevy 265's 162. Chevy offered 283 V8 engines with 185 horsepower or 220 horsepower. If you were really power hungry, there was a dual quad solid lifter version available with 270 horsepower, or the legendary Fuelie with 283 horsepower. Plymouth offered buyers a 301 with either 215 or 235 horsepower, plus the Fury model's dual quad 318 with 290 horsepower. By the way, the Chevy fuel-injected 283 was not the first production engine with 1 horsepower per cubic inch. That honor goes to the 1956 Chrysler 300B's optional engine, with 355 horsepower from 354 cubic inches. What's that? Am I not going to even mention Ford here? Okay, Ford had an available dual quad 312 with 270 horsepower and an extremely rare supercharged 312 rated at 300 horses. And I do mean rare. I've seen that engine in Thunderbirds, but never in a Ford sedan. And I understand that only a handful were built. In '57, Plymouth could be ordered with a state-of-the-art 3-speed TorqueFlite automatic transmission with push-button control. Chevy did offer a 3-speed automatic called Turbo Glide, but it had few takers and many problems. Most buyers settled for the 2-speed Power Glide. Plymouth suspension was also all new, featuring torsion bars in front that offered a smoother ride and better handling than Chevy or Ford. Ford actually outsold Chevy in 1957, with Plymouth in third place. Plymouth sales suffered due to some serious quality issues and rust that hurt the company's brand image for years to come. But GM management was so rattled they reworked the Chevy line completely for 1958, then spent millions to do it again for 1959. Now, Chevy styling would lead the way in the 60s with some of the best-looking cars on the road. But in 1957, Plymouth was clearly a more advanced and better-looking car than the Chevy. But who might argue with true GM believers? Anyway, before I end this, one last thing. I mentioned earlier about paying $1 for a car or two. This is one of them. Any idea of the year, make, or model? Let me know what you think. Well, thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this, please press the like button and leave a comment if you wish. I've got lots more to talk about, and I'll be posting more shows soon. Happy trails!